All right. Hey, everybody. Today we're going to finish up our series on Inner and East Asia by talking about new kingdoms, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. All three are rice cultivating economies whose labor needs to fit in with Confucian concepts of hierarchy, obedience, and discipline. And all of these adopted some aspects of Chinese culture, but the political methods and ideologies of each country remains very different. Even though none of them used the Chinese civil service exam, all three valued individuals being literate in Chinese characters. So that way, the Chinese classic literature could be read in its original form in Chinese. The Chinese traveled throughout Southeast Asia and India from the 5th century onward, which is how all these different aspects and different cultures are being brought in. So let's start with Vietnam. Vietnam is closer geographically to China than Korea or Japan, so therefore the most direct influence is there. Under the Song, Vietnam was officially a tributary state to China. And the Vietnamese used the Chinese theory of the mandate of heaven to justify the rule of their kings. Buddhism is also very popular in Vietnam. Vietnamese kings and scholars both read and wrote in Chinese characters. Unfortunately, the Vietnamese kings had little control of the countryside. Economic and cultural assimilation took place during the Tang and the Song. And this is when the elite of Annam, which is northern Vietnam, modeled that culture off of the Chinese. And from Annam, that culture will spread down into southern Vietnam, which is called Champa. When the Tang fell, Annam established itself as an independent state under the name Dai Viet. During the Song period, when Dai Viet was established, Champa cultivated a relationship with the Song state, and they exported the very fast maturing Champa rice to China. Again, which is also another reason why the population grows so quickly in southern China. East Asian countries, like I said before, share a common Confucian interest in hierarchy, but the status of women varied from country to country. Luckily, foot binding was not common outside of China. Before Confucianism was introduced to Annam, sorry guys, before Confucianism was introduced to Annam, women there had a higher status than women in Confucian China. Nowhere was the education of women considered valuable or even desirable, though. So keep that in mind. We're going to move on to talking about Korea. The Korea hereditary elite absorbed Confucianism and Buddhism from China, and from there, they were passed along to Japan. Korea was divided into several chiefdoms, three of which became rather significant states. And from 108 BCE to 313 CE, Korea was was a Chinese state. It was controlled by the Han. The Korean people prayed to local deities and nature spirits. In northern Korea, there was some contact with China, and they also borrowed heavily from Chinese models such as technology, political aspects, and education. In 1170, the Chinese style government was overthrown by military officials who took over the government of Korea, but trade with China did continue. And Korea also surpassed China in reproducing some of the exports that came in from China. King Papa of Sia wanted to promote Buddhism, but very powerful families of Korea really opposed the religion. He starts doing this in 540. By the middle of the 6th century, though, so by about 550, 560, all three of the major kingdoms had become pro-Buddhist. So he was actually able to promote Buddhism despite some elite families opposing this. The Sui, as you know, attempted and failed several times to invade Korea, which is actually what led to their downfall. And the Xia, which King Pohung is in charge of, used its alliance with the Tang to weaken its rivals. The Xia state was divided into 7 bone rank classifications, but unfortunately, the kingdom declines after 780 due to a lot of fighting within the family. And our last topic for today is on Japan. And we're going to be talking about the transition to the shogunates today. Japan consists of 4 large islands and many small ones. Writing was not developed natively, so the only written sources, the earliest written sources, I should say, date back from the year 720 and on. So, unfortunately, we do not know a lot about early Japan. A couple of things we do know, the native religion of Japan is Shinto. In the 5th and 6th centuries, many Koreans fled to Japan, and Buddhism is very successful in Japan. And this can be attributed to 2 miracles that helped to convince the Japanese to accept Buddhism. We'll be talking about these 2 miracles in class. During the Sui and the Tang, Japan sought to learn from China. And this is another reason why there's quite a bit of influence from China in Japan. There were 2 forms of Japanese writing, one with Chinese characters and one called kana. And Japan was often referred to as the land of the rising sun. Also, take note of their flag, how that works together. After 900, warrior clans forced the Japanese emperor to abandon his Chinese-style government. And the Japanese continued to import Confucian and Buddhist texts and to use Chinese characters. Now, this is the transition to the shogunate, is when the general and the warrior clans forced the emperor to abandon his style of government. And in the mid 7th century, the rulers of Japan implemented a series of political reforms to establish that centralized government, that legal code, national histories, all based on the Tang. Even after Buddhism arrives, the native religion of Shintoism not just survives, but thrives. And it's actually Zen Buddhism. When we talk more about the shogunate later, you will have the warriors who are in charge, who did not like this model of government from the Tang. And we have the breakdown of warrior classes that will lead us eventually into the Heian period in Japan. Let's talk about women and shoguns. Women of the upper class became royal consorts, and that would link the court with their own kingsmen. A constitution that influenced Japanese political thought for centuries was developed in 604 when a woman reigned as empress, and she actually took over the rule of her husband, Suko, at his death in 592. During the Heian period, 794 to 1185, the Fujiwara clan dominated the Japanese government as shogunates. And this is where the Pillow Book comes from. It's one of the first books that is written in history by a woman, if not the first. And this period is known for the refinement of the aristocracy, the elevation of civil officials among warriors. The Pillow Book depicts imperial court women living very, very public lives, which is very contradictory to the Fujiwara woman. By the late 1000s, some warrior clans had become wealthy and powerful, and after years of fighting one another, clans took control of Japan and established the Kamakura shogunate, and its capital was in the eastern Honshu area. Obviously also named Kamakura. We will talk more about this in class as we dive into our next unit. We talk about the Mongols. We will talk a bit more about Japan as well. So, in conclusion, just wrapping everything up, Buddhism, preferred in some places, smothered out in others. the revival of Confucianism, and talking about Japan retaining greater political independence from China than Korea or Vietnam, but with a political system based on a warrior class that can lead to some issues later on. But we'll dive in more as we continue our journey throughout world history. So have a great day, guys. Have any questions, email me, and have a wonderful weekend. Cheers, y'all.